After finishing school, I moved in with my older brother for about 4 years. We shared the rent on a small apartment since neither of us could afford to live on our own. But as the 4th year rolled around, my brother started making more money and planned to move out when our lease expired. I wasn't earning much, so I knew I couldn't afford the place by myself. I spent months looking for a new roommate, but ultimately decided it would be easier to move out and find a cheaper place. I searched right up until the last month of our lease. By then, my brother had already moved most of his stuff out, and I was feeling the pressure to find something quickly. But with my limited budget, it was tough. Finally, I came across an online listing posted by someone renting out a room in their house. The owner's name was Evan. I texted Evan to let him know I was interested and continued my search while waiting for his reply. A few minutes later, he responded, and we set up a time to talk later that day. During our call, he explained the details. He lived alone in the house and was renting out a spare bedroom, but I'd have access to the rest of the house as well. It sounded perfect for me, so I agreed to move in. A couple of weeks later, I packed up a U-Haul and drove to the house. Evan had sent me plenty of photos, but I hadn't had the chance to see the place in person. When I arrived around noon, I parked in the driveway and noticed that while the house was small, it looked nice from the outside. Evan was waiting in the garage and waved me over as I got out of the truck. He gave me a quick tour of the house and then helped me unload my things into the room. Evan seemed like an ordinary guy in his mid-30s, almost a decade older than me, but I didn't mind. He was a bit shy and didn't seem great at holding conversations, but he was polite. Once we finished moving everything in, I returned the U-Haul and took an Uber back to the house. By then, it was almost 8 p.m., and I was exhausted. Evan was on the couch watching TV when I got back, so I told him I was heading to bed early and went to my room. The house seemed decent enough, and I felt good about my decision to move in. I unpacked a bit more, set up my bed, and by 9, I was ready to sleep. As I reached for the door to lock it and turn off the lights, I noticed something strange. The doorknob was missing a lock. Puzzled, I opened the door and discovered that the lock was on the outside of the door, not the inside. Confused and a bit uneasy, I stepped into the living room and asked Evan why the bedroom door locked from the outside. He seemed just as confused and claimed he hadn't noticed but promised to fix it the next day. I shrugged it off, too tired to worry about it, and returned to my room. I fell asleep quickly, but in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of someone moving around in the kitchen. I assumed it was just Evan grabbing a late-night snack, so I closed my eyes again. But then I heard footsteps in the hallway, and they stopped right outside my room. I opened my eyes, staring at the door. For about 15 seconds, there was silence. Then, I heard a soft click. Evan had locked my door from the outside. My heart sank, and a cold fear gripped me. I listened as Evan walked away, presumably to his own room. As soon as I heard his door close, I jumped out of bed and rushed to the door. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. This man I had just met had locked me in a room. Fear quickly turned into anger. I called out for Evan, demanding he unlock the door. After a moment, I heard him run out of his room and come to my door. There was a pause before he finally unlocked it. I swung the door open, confronting him with a furious, "What the hell was that?" Evan stammered, saying he just wanted to make sure he was safe since he didn't know me well. While I understood his concern, locking someone in a room was not the way to handle it. I told him I'd be packing up and leaving in the morning. I spent the rest of the night on the couch in the living room, wide awake and on edge, waiting for the U-Haul store to open. At 9 a.m., I checked the hallway and saw that Evan's bedroom door was still closed. I hoped he was still asleep as I drove to get the U-Haul. But when I returned to the house, his bedroom door was open. "Evan?" I called out, but there was no response. I peeked into his room, only to find it empty. My unease deepened as I realized something wasn't right. I didn't waste any time and started moving my stuff out as fast as I could. After a couple of hours, I was down to the last few boxes. I hurried back inside to grab another when Evan suddenly appeared in the doorway. "Move," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He stared at me, expressionless, for what felt like an eternity before finally stepping aside. I quickly loaded the box into the U-Haul, leaving only one left inside, a half-full box of food from my old apartment. I decided to just leave it, wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible. As I was closing the back of the U-Haul, Evan interrupted, holding out the last box. "You forgot this." "Oh, thanks," I muttered, taking it from him. As I turned to stack it in the truck, I felt him move behind me. I turned just in time to see him grabbing the door, trying to close me in. I reacted instinctively, shoving him to the ground. He quickly scrambled to his feet, but instead of running back into the house, he bolted towards the trees at the edge of the property. I didn't stop to think about what just happened. I slammed the U-Haul door shut and drove away, my heart racing. My brother was kind enough to let me stay with him until I found a new place, but the whole experience left me shaken. I don't know what was really going on in that house, or what might have happened if I hadn't left, but there was definitely something very wrong. My roommate was out of town for the week, leaving me alone in the apartment. It was spring break, so there were no college classes, and I had nothing planned, no obligations, nowhere to be. Monday came, and with it, a powerful storm that trapped me inside. It wasn't unusual for this time of year, but it always felt more intense each time, like the wind might rip the trees from their roots and the house would collapse under the pressure. The constant creaking of the walls made it clear I wasn't getting any sleep that night. To distract myself, I turned on my Xbox and got lost in a video game. I played for what felt like hours until the clock neared 11 now. That's when the doorbell rang. Startled, I paused the game and stood up, my mind immediately questioning who could possibly be out in this weather. I walked to the front door and peered through the peephole. Nothing. I opened the door a crack and the wind and rain lashed against me, but there was no one there. I shut the door quickly, trying to convince myself that the storm had somehow triggered the doorbell. I sat back down, attempting to shake off the unease, but I couldn't fully immerse myself in the game again. Only a few minutes passed before I heard a loud crash from the backyard, furniture toppling over, glass breaking. My heart raced as I rushed to the back door, where I saw our patio furniture scattered across the yard, being tossed around by the relentless wind. I slipped on my shoes and darted outside, fighting against the storm to gather the furniture and shove it against the house for safety. The wind stung as it whipped rain into my face, but I worked quickly, trying to get back inside. That's when I noticed someone standing at the far edge of the yard, just watching me. I froze, staring back at the figure for what felt like an eternity before hurriedly grabbing the last chair and bolting inside. I locked the door behind me and wiped the rain from my face, glancing back outside. The person was gone. Between the doorbell and this mysterious figure, unease was quickly turning into fear. I sat down in the living room, trying to distract myself with my phone, but the storm and my growing anxiety made it impossible to focus. Exhaustion eventually took over, and I pulled a blanket over myself on the couch, unwilling to face the storm's wrath upstairs. I don't know how long I was asleep before I was jolted awake by another fierce gust of wind shaking the house. Groggy, I pushed the blanket aside and swung my feet down to the floor, only to feel cold, wet fabric beneath me. The shock snapped me fully awake. I looked down and saw a puddle of water near the couch. Then I noticed another one, and another, leading across the floor in a trail. Inside, the puddles were faint, muddy footprints. Panic gripped me as I jumped up and backed into a corner of the room, heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the storm outside. After what felt like an eternity of listening to the silence, I forced myself to follow the footprints. They trailed throughout the house, upstairs, downstairs, but their path began at the back door. The very door I had forgotten to lock in my haste to escape the rain. I quickly locked it now, my hands trembling as I reached for my phone to call 911. But then a terrifying thought crossed my mind. What if the intruder was still inside? I moved quietly to a hidden corner of the house where I could see both the front and back doors and dialed 911. I waited in agonizing silence until the police arrived. They searched the house thoroughly, finding the same footprints I did, but nothing more. Nothing was missing. Nothing was disturbed. The police told me it seemed like a targeted intrusion, something personal. They couldn't explain why the intruder walked right up to me while I slept, only to do nothing but leave muddy tracks throughout the house. It was deeply unsettling, but the more I thought about it, the more I became convinced that whoever broke in was looking for my roommate. They must have realized they had the wrong person and left. The thought still haunts me. What would have happened if my roommate had been there instead of me? Before I made the move to California, I spent several years living in a remote area on my dad's ranch in Colorado. It was a beautiful, sprawling property, but the isolation always made me uneasy. Life in such a rural setting could get monotonous, and as that old cartoon, Courage, the Cowardly Dog, suggested, creepy things happen in the middle of nowhere. My dad always kept a few guns on the property, mostly for protection. Trespassers weren't uncommon, and I remember one time he had to scare off 2 men who had wandered too close to our home with his rifle. The event I'm about to recount happened a few years ago, in mid-June. I was home alone. My parents were on vacation, and my younger brother was either out with friends or at his girlfriend's place for the night. I can't quite remember. It was an unusually hot night for Colorado, so I had all the windows open. Back then, I was a bit of a night owl, and it was around 1 a.m. when I was still up watching TV in the living room. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the motion-sensing patio light flick on outside. This light only activated when something sizable moved close by, so my first thought was that my brother had come home. To be sure, I got up and glanced out the window, but I didn't see anyone. I quickly called my brother, but he didn't answer. Feeling a bit uneasy, I sat back down on the couch. That's when it started. A knock at the front door. Our front door had a peephole, which made sense given how isolated we were. Anyone who came to our house had to go out of their way to get there, so we always checked before opening the door. I peered through the peephole, but saw nothing. No one was there. My mind immediately went to the possibility of it being a prank, maybe some local kids messing around or even my brother playing a joke. I decided to close the blinds, feeling paranoid that I might be watched. I texted my brother a quick message. If this is you, I'm not letting you in. But just moments later, there was another knock. This time, it was right behind me on the living room window. The sound startled me so much that I jumped off the couch. The knock was followed by what I can only describe as 2 voices, one deep and male, the other higher-pitched, possibly female, both saying in unison, "We see you." My heart raced as I tried to rationalize what was happening. I wanted to believe it was my brother and his girlfriend playing a prank on me. It seemed like the most logical explanation at the moment. But the knocking didn't stop. It moved to another window, this time in the dining room, where I had forgotten to close the blinds. From where I stood, I could make out 2 shadowy figures, but it was impossible to see their faces clearly. Without thinking, I bolted upstairs to my dad's room, remembering that he kept a rifle under his bed for emergencies. I grabbed the gun, loaded it, and rushed back downstairs to the dining room window. But by the time I got there, the figures were gone. With the rifle in hand, I felt a surge of confidence. I decided to step outside and confront whoever was out there. I did a quick lap around the house, checking on the cattle as well, but everything seemed fine. No signs of anyone, and the animals were undisturbed. Feeling somewhat reassured, I went back inside, made sure all the doors were locked, and went to bed upstairs. For about half an hour, everything was quiet. But then, a sudden frantic pounding at the front door jolted me awake. This time, it was accompanied by a man's voice screaming at the top of his lungs, not words, just raw, terrifying screams. Grabbing the rifle from beside my bed, I ran to the living room window, threw it open, and fired a shot into the dark. The screaming and pounding stopped instantly. I heard the sound of footsteps, 2 sets, rushing off the porch and disappearing into the night. After that, there was nothing but the usual chorus of crickets. The rest of the night passed without incident, and in fact, nothing strange happened again until I moved out of that house. The next day, I confirmed it wasn't my brother and his girlfriend who had been messing with me. When my dad heard the story, he was proud that I had protected the property, and I couldn't have agreed more about the importance of keeping those guns around after that night.